What do you get when you mix a glam rock icon, a drug-fueled punk legend, and a full-body costume? Well, one of the strangest pranks in the history of rock and roll. In the 1970s, chaos wasn't just part of the show, it was the show. And somewhere in the haze of heroin, glitter, and distortion, Elton John, yes, that Elton John, decided to crash a Stooges concert dressed as a gorilla and launch himself at Iggy Pop on stage. The result? A moment so surreal, Iggy thought he was hallucinating. No, this isn't a myth. This actually happened, and the story behind it is even weirder than the prank itself. Hi, I'm Andy Fenstermaker, host of Poetic Wax, a weekly music history series and podcast where I dig into the record collection I've been building since the 1990s to explore the little-known history of a band, album, or song from within. Let's rewind to a time when rock stars didn't just push boundaries, they obliterated them. Because to really understand this bizarre moment, you need to know where Iggy Pop was in his life and his career. By the early 1970s, James Osterberg, better known as Iggy Pop, was circling rock bottom. His band, the Stooges, had released 3 chaotic but revolutionary albums: The Stooges from 1969, Funhouse from 1970, and Raw Power from 1973. But none were true commercial hits. Critics were confused, audiences weren't ready. Yet beneath the surface, Iggy was defining something raw and primal that would later become punk rock. By 1973, the band was barely functioning. Drugs had taken over. Iggy was deep into heroin addiction. The third Stooges album, Raw Power, produced by David Bowie, had come out earlier that year, but even Bowie's involvement couldn't keep the band together. The energy was explosive, but the chaos off stage was even greater. Well, chaos on stage too. True to Iggy, the creation of Raw Power was chaotic from the start. Recorded at CBS Studios in London in 1972, the Stooges were signed to Columbia Records largely because of David Bowie's endorsement. Bowie saw Iggy Pop as a kind of American mirror image, dangerous, magnetic, and teetering on the edge of something revolutionary. But by the time the sessions began, the band was barely functional. Ron Ashton had been demoted from guitar to bass, James Williamson was brought in to handle lead guitar, and Iggy, deep in his throes of addiction once again, insisted on producing the record himself. His original mixes were raw but disorganized. This led to a botched job where instruments were mixed onto a single stereo channel with vocals onto another. I mean, it was an absolute mess. Columbia executives were horrified by what they heard. Everything was distorted, uneven, and almost unlistenable by major label standards. So Bowie was called in last minute to remix the album, reportedly in just one day at Western Sound Recorders in Los Angeles. Quote, "I went in and mixed it in about 10 hours. It was really quick. I was just trying to make it listenable because the original mix was so savage." That was David Bowie via Uncut Magazine. Bowie's version attempted to dial back the chaos. The result was cleaner, but in many fans' and many band members' eyes, still a bit neutered. In Tin Machine by Tony Hawkins from 1991, Bowie would recount the experience. Quote, "He had the band on one track, lead guitar on another, and him on a third. Out of 24 tracks, there were just 3 tracks that were used. Iggy said, 'See what you can do with this.' I said, 'Jim, there's nothing to mix.' So we just pushed the vocal up and down a lot. On at least 4 or 5 songs, that was the situation, including Search and Destroy. That's got such a peculiar sound because all we did was occasionally bring the lead guitar up and take it out." Iggy would later chime in on the mix, saying, quote, "It's not David's fault, but the mix doesn't have the ferocity of the performance. The record is missing the rawness. I gave him something impossible to work with." That was Iggy Pop in The Quietus. James Williamson, though, was a bit more blunt. Quote, "Bowie's mix sucked. There's no other way to put it." So, Iggy was deep into addiction, the band was falling apart, the live shows were dangerous, unpredictable, and often completely unhinged. Let's bullet point a few examples, why don't we? Iggy rolling around in broken glass. Iggy having an incident with peanut butter. Iggy challenging a biker gang and getting knocked out. But those are stories for another time. For this one, we have to pivot to the Rocket Man himself, Elton John. By the time Elton John entered the picture, raw power had come and gone with little fanfare, and Iggy Pop was hanging by a thread. And that's where Elton did a pivot, saying goodbye to the brick road for something else that was yellow. Bananas. In 1973, Elton was as high as Iggy, but the drug was stardom. His 1973 album Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was a massive hit. He was the Rocket Man, British pop royalty, and a man with a sharp sense of humor, deep empathy, and a flair for the theatrical. Somehow, despite their differences, or maybe because of them, Elton and Iggy met. The details are a little hazy, but they ran in overlapping circles. The UK glam rock scene wasn't that big, and everyone knew everyone. Some say Bowie introduced them. Regardless, Elton liked Iggy. He admired his wildness, even if he didn't fully understand it. And he liked him enough to agree to, at the behest of management and the magazine Cream, play a practical joke that would truly go down as legendary. So when the opportunity came up to surprise Iggy at one of his shows, Elton didn't just say yes, he went full gorilla. Iggy was in the midst of playing several dates in Atlanta over the course of about a week in mid-October 1973. Elton had just flown into town and, well, he dressed up in a full gorilla costume and burst onto stage mid-set in front of a full crowd. Iggy, stuffed full of quaaludes and barely tethered to reality, froze. He would later say, quote, "Suddenly this gorilla walks out from backstage and holds me up in the air while I'm still singing. I was out of my mind with fear. I thought it was a real gorilla." And that's from Gimme Danger. I was like, oh my God, what can I do? I couldn't fight him. I could barely stand. And that one was from Please Kill Me. Elton, on the other hand, was thrilled, saying, quote, "I came on in a gorilla suit and jumped on him, and he had no idea who I was. He thought he was hallucinating. It was brilliant." So it's almost cartoonish, right? The pop titan in a gorilla suit crashing the stage like some glam era Godzilla stomping on a crumbling city that was already on fire. And, well, that's exactly what the Stooges were. Abandoned ruins, a frontman on the edge of oblivion, higher than a skyscraper, with Elton playing an absurd monster lurching into the wreckage. But instead of destruction, he brought something else, something weirdly tender and dressed in fur, and maybe a little chaos. Years later, he told the story with a grin. Quote, "I love Iggy. He's such a great guy, but he was completely out of it. I think he thought I was the devil or something." It was part prank, part performance, and maybe underneath it all, a strange act of care. Not many people were reaching out to Iggy at this point, aside from some run-ins with Bowie, who was himself in the throes of addiction. Elton did it in the most Elton way possible, and somehow it landed spectacularly. Pausing for a quick moment of self-promotion, Poetic Wax can be found on YouTube, on your favorite podcast platforms, on TikTok, and on Substack. I'd love it if you followed me in multiple places. You can also join the weekly newsletter where I get a little bit more personal at poeticwaxpodcast.com/join. The gorilla suit story might sound a little trivial, but it says something deeper about that time in history. It was an era where boundaries didn't exist, when rock stars moved beyond musicians and performance artists into being provocateurs and living contradictions. And in a strange way, the prank encapsulates everything the 1970s were: glamorous, chaotic, funny, frightening, and kind of impossible to replicate. You had Elton John, the consummate showman, in peak costume mode, crashing a show by Iggy Pop, the unhinged godfather of punk, who thought he was being attacked by a jungle creature mid-heroin nod. It's almost poetic. Today, stories like these feel like relics from another planet, but they remind us of what made that era so compelling: the unpredictability, the madness, and yes, the gorilla suits. And that's what makes it unforgettable. Within a few years, Iggy would check himself into a mental institution in an attempt to clean himself up. Bowie would visit regularly during his Plastic Soul and Thin White Duke eras. Then the two would steal away to Berlin. I've covered these stories a little bit in a few previous episodes about Bowie, and one in the aftermath where I look at one of my personal favorite Iggy solo albums, Soldier, and why it was such a mess. And one of those might be a good thing to dig into next.